I did it. I can put this down now. I'm going to continue to admit people. Thank you all for coming today on November's episode of Master Naturalist Monday. I'm excited to have Sarah Bailey from Prairie Plains Resource Institute here with us. Um, if you are new, I should introduce myself. I always forget to this. Hello, I'm Jamie Bachman, the Nebraska Master Naturalist Program Coordinator. Um, if you are new to Master Naturalist Mondays, the flow of the hour we will have a reflective prompt. This is for us to engage with each other. You can unmute yourself. You can pop your reflections in the chat. And then we will have our presenter, and at the end we will have times for questions with the presenters. And then at the very end, I have some updates on events and happenings with the Master Naturalist program. People are still coming in. Let's get you all in here. I think that's it. I'm going to share my screen and we will engage. Let's see. Oh, I have 3 screens now. I forgot. Here we go. Can everybody see the reflective prompt screen? Thumbs up, maybe? Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so in line with our presentation today, I have brought forth some terms: ecological interdependence, symbiotic relationships, and coevolution. So let's. I invite you to unmute yourself or pop in the chat any reflections you have on these, whether it's experience in the natural world or I who do we have here? Is that you, Glenn?
Yeah, just gonna talk about coevolution. I've been to Australia 4 different times. It's really fun to see the coevolution down there. For example, they have a bird who lives in the grasslands called the Plains Wanderer. The thing looks just like a prairie chicken and does the same things a prairie chicken does, but they're totally different species. And there's a wallaby grass, which we are similar to little blue stem, and then there's a kangaroo grass that's similar to big blue stem.
Thank you. Thank you for contributing, Glenn. Nice to see you again today. And yeah, feel free to pop in the chat or unmute yourself to contribute in any way to these reflections. I see you're unmuted, Judy. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. Since my master's degree is in evolutionary ecology, I could go on for way too long about any of those substance.
Oh no, she freezes sometimes when I'm. What a bummer. Hopefully she comes back. But in the meantime, do we have anybody else that would like to contribute? Oh, we have some things in the chat. Let me admit some folks. Alexis thinks of mycelium and also how lichen, and in lichen as well, there's a symbiotic relationship there. Linda says, thinking of species needing each other to survive. Melissa, I think ecological interdependence gets to the heart of our relationship with the natural world. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I froze. It didn't want me to talk.
Yes. Yes, please continue.
Well, what he talked about earlier, we would call convergent evolution, where you have similar species in totally different parts of the world. And for those who went through the Desert Dome with me on, I guess it was just Saturday, we talked about the bat-eared foxes from Africa with the swift foxes here in central North America as an example that we have right there. But I could go on forever with things like these, but because everything is interdependent. Um, During the conference, I kept thinking about John Muir's. You can't, you tug on one thing in the world and everything's connected to it for the ecological interdependence because it is. Um, so just they're all over the place. The coevolution of the insects and the flowering plants, the symbiotic relationships between all sorts of things out there, not just algae and uh, corals, which those who were in the aquarium saw, um, and just everything everywhere. We're all connected.
Thank you, Judy. I appreciate your contributions. So lovely. We have in the chat, Glynis says, I'm thinking of Amber's presentation at the conference on Saturday, and her discussion of human coevolution with our environment and how necessary it is to our healthy development. Belinda says, I think of the bees and the flowering plants and angiosperms. Mary says, I have been watching a show on the migration of the continents, and I wonder if the fact that all continents were once united explains coevolution. There's some pretty fascinating things in there around that. I've kind of dipped into that wormhole,
Well,
that nerd hole.
yeah, well, I know that bananas, because they reproduce vegetatively, are known to have been something that was separated by the continental drift, uh, and or bananas and banana relative plants that are in both Africa and South America. And you're like, oh, really? Because it wasn't through seeds.
Any other contributions? I appreciate connecting with you all and just having the chance to hear your voices or your ideas and thoughts. So I thank you for participating. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and we will begin our presentation today. One last one says, I think Joshua says, I think of bats developing specialized echolocation to get moths, and moths learning how to hear them better and make evasive maneuvers.
Oh, that is so cool. That is so cool. The tails on a lot of butterflies and moths are thought to be decoys to acoustic detection by the bats. So the bat thinks that's the body of the butterfly or moth and goes for that instead of the body of the moth. It's so cool.
I love your enthusiasm. It's so great. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our speaker here. We have I'm so grateful to have Sarah Bailey from Prairie Plains Resource Institute. She is the Conservation and Education Director, and she's doing absolutely fabulous work, not just with restoring prairie violets, but also with connecting humans to the more than natural world. I am in awe of the work that y'all are doing over there. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us today and connecting with our community.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. And I love this conversation and to start and how it kind of connects to thinking about restoration and reconnecting us to the natural world, but also trying to put all those pieces back together to create functioning ecosystems and thinking about coevolution and stuff. So that was perfect. I feel like I could sit and talk forever to you guys about that. So I love those responses. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see? Is it sharing properly?
Yes, it's sharing. It's still not.
All right. Good. Always want to make sure. So yeah, thanks again, Jamie, for inviting me to this today. So I'm going to talk mostly about restoring and enhancing Regal Fritillary habitat through planting of native violet plugs, so some plants that we grow out in our greenhouse at different prairie restoration sites in Nebraska. But just to back up a little bit, if you're not familiar with Prairie Plains Resource Institute here in Nebraska, just want to share a little bit about us and also how we do our high diversity and local ecotype prairie restoration work, just to kind of give a basis for everything, and then we'll kind of dive into the growing of the violets and what we're doing to restore the habitat for regals and many other things. So the mission of Prairie Plains is to connect people and prairies. And so we do this through our prairie restoration efforts around the state of Nebraska. Most of those take place in central and eastern Nebraska. And also through our education on our network of prairie preserves. And then by doing that, we create opportunities for folks to build lifelong connections with the land. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 1980, and we're based out of Aurora, Nebraska. But as mentioned, we get around all throughout central and eastern Nebraska, and do restoration work in those areas. We are an educational land trust, so we have 8 different prairie properties and preserves that we own around the state. You can see a few of those, or you can see those on the map, even though it's not very big, probably on screen. But if you have any questions on that, and maybe visiting some of those, I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards or connect you to those sites. And then we've also led the way for high diversity and local ecotype prairie and wetland restoration work in the state of Nebraska. And I'll get more into that here in a moment. And we also specialize in grassland management and naturalist education on our network of these different preserves in Nebraska. So to dive into our restoration work a little bit, some of you may be familiar with, native plant gardening, perhaps, and maybe some of the restoration efforts, seed mixes, things you can purchase to do this. But this will highlight, how we approach that at Prairie Plains, and what we're looking to do more from an ecological restoration standpoint of both prairie and wetland ecosystems in the state. And so just to define a few things first, there's some different words that get utilized as far as saying prairie restoration or reconstruction. We tend to I'll use the word restoration a lot throughout this, and what I'm referring to is kind of what we'd call a from scratch, restoration, or what other people may consider a reconstruction, where we're recreating a plant community, for example, prairie or wetland, where one once existed but is now gone. So in a lot of cases, of course, here in Nebraska, that is where things have been cropped for decades, many years, and we're now taking some of that marginal farmland and returning it back to these native plant communities. There's other terms that people might use, like overseeding and things like that, to kind of help restore degraded prairies. But throughout this presentation, most of what we'll talk about is restoration work that takes place in areas that were once cropland, and we're working to restore those plant communities from scratch. We do high diversity prairie restoration work, so our seed mixes we define as having greater than 75 plant species within them, or a blend of mixes that have over 75 different species. Oftentimes, if we use different seed mixes for different soil types and things like that across a restoration site, we often have well over 100 species that go into those mixes that get planted at those sites. And we also focus on local ecotype seed harvesting. So we do a lot of hand harvesting and source our seed from local wild populations here in central and eastern Nebraska. And so we define that there's some different definitions out there depending on who you talk to. Our definition of local ecotype is about a 100 to a 150 mile radius to that, of where we're harvesting that seed and where it's going back on the ground to restore those areas. So these are just some photos that show that work in action. So we are out harvesting seed all the way from about the end of May, kind of mid-May or end of May, all the way until end of October or even early November. So we actually just ended our seed harvest season. During that time, we collect, typically in a year, we collect over 230 different species that go into these mixes for upland prairies, for wetlands, for sandy sites, mesic prairie. And so this is essentially what that hand harvesting work looks like. We strap on, 2-gallon or 5-gallon buckets with carabiners, so we have our hands free and can go out and harvest seed. We collect seed out of like county roadside ditches where there's still native plant populations there. We obviously do harvest from native prairie sites, our own, and also where we have permission, with taking care, not to over harvest at those sites, and then off some of our past restorations as well. So again, just showcasing some of that beautiful seed diversity that's out there of those many, many different species. Of course, there's lots of wildflowers or forbs represented in those seed mixes, and many of course, our native grasses, both major and minor, sedges as well, and rushes and things like that in the wetland mixes. And so this shows, kind of that range of where we actually do a lot of our harvesting. And so, you kind of have this cluster. If you think about where we're all kind of based out of, right in the Aurora, Nebraska area, these are our waypoints where we've GPS different areas where we can go back to harvest seed in some of these county roadside ditches. So you can see on the map kind of where a lot of that work ends up taking place. And you can compare that then to planting sites. So the green dots on this map represent a bunch of different planting sites throughout time that Prairie Plains has done. So it fits kind of nicely into that area where the seed is being harvested from. And you can see the 100 to 150 mile radius kind of around where we're harvesting and where we're planting. So once we're done with seed harvest in the fall, then we move on to doing seed processing and getting everything ready to go into seed mixes. So the picture on the left shows our seed barn up here at Gerloff Prairie, where we store that seed to dry out. So it gets really full by the end of the season, and we have to send all that through the hammer mill that we have. And so that's the photo, that's the lower middle photo there. So we send that through the hammer mill. It breaks up all that plant material and allows the seed to fall through. And we collect that and then are able to take those different, buckets and barrels and things like that with labeled seed in it, and then create our mixes from that. So this is, if you have more questions on this, this is kind of going to be the short and condensed version of this. So I'd be happy to answer more of that later. If you have questions, you could email me or anything like that. But so that's the process. We also do a combine harvest of the major grass species, and we get some forbs that way as well that are ready at the same time. Often we do this out of some of our past restoration sites. And so we combine the combine harvested mix then with the forb mixes that are hand harvested that we create. So we create these mixes based on soil types and hydrologies. So meaning that we are able to look ahead of time at these planting sites and look at the soil types that are present in those areas, and then also look at LIDAR data and how close we are to the water table in some of those areas. And so Mike Bullerman, our restoration ecologist pictured in most of these photos here, he does a lot of that planting work after we work together to create those seed mixes. And so we actually utilize these, old 1950s fertilizer spreaders. It's called Easy Flows. So they're a broadcast spreader. We broadcast seed rather than drill it. There's a lot of things that have very small seed that actually benefit from being very close to the surface of the soil or even on top in order to be able to germinate. So we do that broadcast seeding. We do that over the winter time. and into the spring. And having actually, you can see in some of those photos, having a little bit of snow on the ground is actually pretty beneficial. And so you can both see the path where you've been planting. We also use GPS to help us with that as well. But you can also see in that picture on the lower right, the seed that has dropped out of that spreader once you go over an area. So the map then is the subset of counties that we've worked in, showing different planting sites. You can see that there's a lot of planting sites that have taken place along some of our kind of riverine environments in Nebraska. So kind of along the Platte River, also the Loop and some of the Elkhorn, and many other places like the Rainwater Basin areas, along the Missouri River and things like that. So then to jump to kind of some important considerations in our work and how we approach ecological restoration. And so as I hit on, our seed mixes do contain 100, sometimes even when they're blended up to 150 species, and collected from these local wild populations. So that's where we get our terms high diversity and local ecotype restoration. And so the high diversity and local ecotype seed mixes often provide excellent pollinator habitat. So when those sites get managed effectively, either with burning, maybe some grazing or haying in combination, those really develop and become excellent pollinator habitat. There's a lot of forb species that are present at those sites. And it's really neat to go back to those sites, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line, and see the development of those plant communities. Also, the high diversity and local ecotype mixes are uniquely suited to our hydrologic regimes in the areas we're planting. So I also kind of touched on that, but we are making sure that we're creating these different seed mixes and mapping those sites out so we can determine where the seed mixes are most appropriate at those sites so that those species have the right conditions to develop and become successful in those sites. So you can see, a map on that upper left photo there, and the bottom shows a conservation easement boundary at a wetland reserve easement site that we were planting. And so, we really tie those seed mixes to the important, hydrologies of those areas. Also, many of the species in some of these mixes, some of them might be not available commercially. So from a more commercial seed mix from a seed company, or if they are, some of them can be very expensive if you're buying them individually. Sorry, moved on there. And then also the resulting plant communities at those sites with that high diversity aspect, they especially have the ability to withstand a lot of different varying events or stochastic events, such as, occasional flooding and drought. And so when those events happen, the more species diversity at a site, the better they are able to respond to those changes. Also, things like annual species that we include in those mixes really can play a nice role in that as well. So the resulting plant communities are quite dynamic. And then also the local ecotype and harvesting those seeds locally, that helps to ensure the preservation of Nebraska's natural botanical heritage as well. So we're trying to preserve, a good number of those genes or that genetic pool within the sites we're restoring. So I'm not gonna go through all of this, but if you are interested, I'd be happy to share any details. But the literature does show quite a bit of evidence that high diversity restoration plantings are highly successful and do a better job at a number of different things in relation to successful restorations versus, say, a lower diversity, maybe a 10 or 15 species seed mix. And so there's a lot of evidence backing that up. What we aim to do with our restoration work is to really restore the functionality of the prairie ecosystem over time. So we can't get exactly what used to be at that site, right? We can't totally replicate the native prairie that was there, but we can get closer to doing that and providing the right species in those areas and the richness of those areas by doing high diversity work. So we're increasing, the plant and pollinator interactions that can happen at those sites with a diversity of wildflowers, and making sure that we have enough wildflowers and forbs in that mix. We're restoring in a lot of sites that might be a part of the wetland reserve easement program or another conservation partner land. We're restoring that water filtration capacity, improving water quality in wetlands, and restoring hydrologic function at a lot of those sites as well. Of course, this is creating cover for wildlife and things like that when managed properly, and food for many other things as well. So again, it is really exciting to watch what comes back into these areas from like an insect pollinator perspective, from a grassland bird perspective, walking through these restorations 10 years, 15 years or more down the line, can be really exciting to see what can happen. So these are just a few photos that showcase some restoration sites that we have worked on over the years, and some of the diversity and beauty of both insects, plants, and other things. We've also seen Regal Fritillaries, which is going to come into play here with the violet talk. But we have seen adult Regals utilizing restoration sites that are adjacent to native prairies where they call home. So that's been exciting, and another reason why we've delved into the work we have with the violets. Also just seeing, some of our native bumblebees, including the at-risk Southern Plains bumblebee, come into these sites is pretty exciting. Many other bee species as well. And so this leads to the greenhouse. And so this is an arm of our restoration work. So far I've talked about, the seeding work, how we use, broadcast seeding to introduce these different species to these sites. But we can further tailor that and provide really important resources by growing some of these plants out in a greenhouse setting. So this journey began about 15 years ago with some state wildlife fund money that helped us to build a small greenhouse on the site of our seed barn. And it kicked off my position with Prairie Plains, an internship to start growing plants in the greenhouse. And with those funds was some specific interest in growing violets and many other species, but things that would benefit pollinators like the Regal Fritillary, monarchs, and others. So that's, from the get-go, the violets were an important thing to try and get going, which I'll get into the story of the Regal and why that's important here soon. So just a little background on what we've done over the last 15 years with that greenhouse. I have the ability to grow over 90 different species. We've fiddled around with a lot of different species in the greenhouse throughout the years. Violets, of course, being a big component of that, but we've sent a lot of, other great pollinator forbs and other plants out there, either for education use in pollinator gardens, and also most of the time into these high diversity restoration sites to try and enhance them and add plant diversity to those sites beyond what we're able to do with the seeding work. So our capacity right now is around 5,000 plugs in that small greenhouse. We also focus, aside from the violets, we focus on growing species that are less common. In some of these restored sites, they might establish slower at those sites, or ones that have high pollinator value. So I mentioned the violets. We also are very interested, and I've been working a lot with some of our early spring ephemeral species in these prairies. Those species can be hard to source a lot of seed for to be well represented in a restoration mix. So the goal is to utilize a lot of that seed that we can get in the greenhouse with ideal growing conditions, and then get those started and put them out as plugs to try and get those, blooms that come out in mid to late April and early May, going at some of those restored sites, because that's where we see a gap. We see a lot of forbs that are very beneficial throughout the mid-season and late season at these restored sites, and they do a very good job of showing up, but it's those early season ones that are consistently absent from restored sites when they get seeded, even with a high diversity mix. So that's an important role that we're trying to fill too. Also, over the years, we've learned that the greenhouse and also, putting out plugs and getting people out on the land, that way has become this exceptional teaching tool for people to learn about and engage in restoration work. And so that's been a really exciting and blending part of my work at Prairie Plains, both working through education and this restoration work is educating older youth, like high school and college age, students about what can be done with restoration and what's happening in Nebraska, and why it plays an important role in conservation. So that's been a really fun way to utilize the greenhouse and see people's excitement over the work come alive. So just a little background. I think some of you are definitely probably familiar with the Regal Fritillary and the role they play in prairie ecosystems. But just to give a little background, this is a highly at-risk butterfly species that's a prairie specialist. And so, and meaning that they only are found in these native prairie habitats where these violets are present. So it's the violets like prairie violet and Missouri violet and downy blue violet and others that this butterfly, their larva, feeds on. And the adults don't fly very far. So they really stay tied to these prairie habitats that they're in. They don't cross a lot of field borders with trees and miles of cropland and things like that to find other prairie sites. They tend to stay right in their little area. So from an evolutionary standpoint, when prairies were vast across the Great Plains in the Midwest, the species, of course, didn't have a problem, but as now we only have about 1 to 2% of that tall grass prairie left, these populations are relegated just to these little tiny pockets of prairie. And so, this is something where, this species has been listed as threatened for a long time. There has been petition to list this as an endangered species. And so that may come to play in the future. And so what we hope to do is to trial these violets, growing out these violets, and we've been putting them into restoration sites that are very close to these native prairie habitats in order to get the butterflies to hopefully kind of filter into those areas and provide larger transects of habitat for them to survive in. And just some, I wanted to mention too, just an interesting tidbit on their life cycle. The larvae actually overwinter in the leaf litter. So as basically a first instar, so a tiny little larva that survives the winter, just kind of against the soil and all that leaf litter. And then they have to find a violet once it warms up in the spring that's nearby to start feeding on. So, they go through those different instars in their life cycle in the spring into early summer. They're pupating then, and then the adult males usually emerge in mid to later June, with the females then emerging a little bit later, kind of end of June into early July. So that's kind of a little tidbit of their life cycle. The males actually die off soon after mating. The females actually go through this really interesting reproductive diapause, and meaning that their ovaries are not completely developed when they mate, but they continue developing throughout the rest of the summer, and then the eggs are fertilized and continue to develop until she then lays the eggs in the kind of the very late part of summer or early fall. So that's kind of an interesting, not every butterfly life cycle is like that. It's a little bit unusual. So it's kind of a neat thing that they do. Those females have to stay alive. They kind of hunker down in the later part of the summer and only come out to feed on nectar once in a while. So another important key consideration, either at their native prairie sites or when restoring prairie, is to also provide those pollinator plants well into the mid and late summer for those females as well. So a little bit about the growing process, and I hope I'm doing okay on time here. I think we're okay so far.
Yep, you're good, Sarah.
So a little bit about the growing process in the greenhouse. This took a few years to really kind of hone in on and figure out the best way to get these violets to grow and germinate. So what was started is that, what we initially started with was actually trying to go out and harvest these little seed pods from these violets. So what you see in these pictures are prairie violets, or Viola petitifida. And that is a very difficult thing to do. These violets, are very short stature. So once things start growing and growing, as you get to kind of, later June or mid to late June, when those pods are ready, the prairie's starting to get tall. Of course, they're easy to miss because they're not in bloom anymore. You don't see that purple color. And so it proved pretty difficult to get much seed at all. And also we learned that timing is really important as well. So these seeds aren't, maybe fully developed until right before the seed capsule bursts. And then the seed just goes everywhere. And of course, then timing is an issue too, to get to those pods in time. So it was really difficult to try and do that. We considered maybe some production beds, but actually what I started doing was getting parent plants for the greenhouse. So what that means is I went to some of these prairie sites like Gerloff Prairie, where we have, hundreds of violets just within a small area, these big patches. And I dig out one or two plants at these sites, where we felt comfortable doing so, where we weren't going to affect population by just taking a couple out. And then I transplant them into pots in the greenhouse and let them go through their whole natural cycle in the greenhouse. And so what I learned is we started having great germination success through that. I put some window screen over the pots when the seeds are being produced. And so that allows the capsule to burst naturally, the seed to spill back into the pots, and then remain there throughout the summer. And they actually stay moist as I water those pots throughout the summer. And then they grow successfully, either, a few in the fall, but then the majority the next spring in the greenhouse. So that worked really well. And one other thing we were able to overcome that was a challenge too is kind of the what would be called the recalcitrant nature of the seed, meaning that they don't want to dry out. So that was another issue with harvesting the seed and waiting to plant until later, is that these seeds really, in order to germinate quickly, they did not want to dry out. So that helped as well with this type of growing process. So what you can see in the right-hand photos there, you can see those parent plants, the adult violets, with a bunch of little seedlings underneath. So those tiny little cotyledon leaves, just with hundreds and hundreds of violets that come up in those pots each late winter and spring in the greenhouse. So then at that point, once we have the little seedlings, I can carefully, remove everything out of the pot and get those little seedlings teased apart and planted into individual containers. So we use ray leach containers, which are about, 4.5, 5 inches long, and allow for root development very quickly. This is something we also use for a lot of other species that we grow in the greenhouse. And many other people use for prairie restoration work. So we get those transplanted and I grow them throughout the greenhouse into the spring. Some are able to be planted typically kind of by mid-May, but we also hold a lot over through the whole summer and actually do a lot of our planting in the fall as well, which I'll talk about too. So that process has seemed to work very well. The seedlings stay healthy throughout the year before getting to a restoration site. And if you have any questions later, I'll be happy to answer that in more depth, but I better keep it rolling here for time. So there are some key considerations for where we actually want to put these plugs and how we want to work with folks to do that. So some questions would be, are these plugs going to be planted in a prairie restoration or maybe a degraded prairie remnant site? We have worked with both of those different scenarios. So the restoration meaning it was cropland, it's adjacent to a native prairie, and after so many years after seeding, we can go in and add those plugs. Or the other option, maybe it's a native prairie, but there's been kind of a harder use history with either grazing or haying or something like that. And some of those species have dropped out, and we want to add some of the diversity back into those native prairie sites. The other thing would be making sure that the restoration sites are close to remnant prairie sites where Regal Fritillaries are present. So making sure that we put our effort into, these plugs going to the sites where the Regal Fritillaries are actually going to benefit. I should also mention too that there are other fritillary species that are native to Nebraska too, that this can benefit. So it's not only the Regal, it's things like the variegated fritillary, in eastern Nebraska, the great spangled fritillary. So other species like that do benefit from having these violets for their larvae as well. And then, so what do we know about the local Regal Fritillary population? So maybe there's been official surveys, maybe not. Maybe there's just anecdotal evidence that they are across some of the site. But then a big question in moving forward too is also prioritizing kind of where action is most needed. And I'll give an example of a cool project we've worked on that seems to have been kind of an urgent action site. But there's, many different things to consider when thinking about that. The timing of planting plugs. So maybe thinking about the age of the restoration. So something we have worked on doing is planting these plugs maybe 4 or 5 years after a site has been seeded. So letting it develop just a little bit, let some of those native plant communities come into that site, but then go in and plant plugs at that point after about the 4 or 5 year mark. And then time of season. So again, I mentioned we do a lot of fall planting, but these plugs can be planted in the spring as well, depending on conditions and potentially post care or post planting care if dry conditions persist. And then also thinking about a commitment to proper management actions is key to the establishment of these violets. So I'll get into that more here. But to maintain these populations, you really have to have effective prairie management at the restored sites. So some considerations for that would be that these violets, also other early season forbs, they really do thrive where prescribed fire is implemented regularly. Also haying could be an option if prescribed fire is not in some cases, and or grazing. But you have to consider balance with all of these things. And so, when you're burning, you have the potential to actually kill some of the Regal larvae at some of these sites because they're overwintering and can't get away, as they're in the prairie, and say if you're doing a spring burn. So, you have to balance that with having refugia at the time that site gets burned. Also same with grazing or haying, making sure it's not an overgrazing, overhaying sort of situation that might also affect things negatively or the Regal negatively. But these things really help provide a window of opportunity for those violets to come up early and bloom and set seed and do their thing, because they need kind of that short stature grassland to do that early on. Also needing to consider controlling woody invasives, which of course is a big threat to grasslands, both native, also when restoring prairie, and everything in between. So thinking about clearing or thinning between restoration and remnant sites is something I've seen as a great opportunity, where there's maybe tree lines where something used to be cropland, making sure that those are taken out so that there's easy transfer between, flight patterns between the native and the restored site. And then also thinking about managing for planting key forbs that provide nectar for adults, and thinking about any post-planting, post-plug planting, or management post-monitoring plans. So of course, this does not happen in a vacuum. We are not the only people doing this. We're just the people that are sourcing the plants and seed and providing these plugs. So we've worked with a number of different partners over the years to get this work done. We've worked with Lincoln Parks and Recreation in the Prairie Corridor, and also Lower Platte South Natural Resources District in order to do some projects within the Prairie Corridor. We have sold plugs to Nebraska Game and Parks and through their legacy division and with Northern Prairies Land Trust. They've been able to do some different plug plantings in eastern Nebraska and into the eastern Sandhills. And we've also worked with the Platte River Recovery and Implementation Program to plant some violets along the Platte River as well at some of their sites. So I want to highlight, as part of this, just one of the big projects we've worked on over the years. This is a longer running project now that started in 2019, where we've planted violet plugs every fall in the Prairie Corridor at different planting sites that have been restored. So one thing I also want to mention too, and to thank Master Naturalists for helping with this, because a number of years we have had Master Naturalist volunteers come along and work with us on some of these planting days. And so we've worked throughout, there's a map there on the left-hand side. We've worked throughout the corridor. I know a lot of you probably are familiar with the Prairie Corridor, but it is a project with the city of Lincoln and Lower Platte South and others to connect the prairie at Pioneers Park Prairie and create this corridor that connects to Spring Creek Prairie, which is down to the southwest in that map that shows all that orange area there. And so this is a really exciting project from a number of different perspectives. Of course, it is going to offer opportunity eventually for people to hike and bike and things like that through this corridor. And so have a lot of opportunity for people to connect and learn about prairie. But it also serves as a great way to protect the native prairie and restore areas around it near the city of Lincoln as it expands. So these areas are going to be protected and, for many years to come. But what also it lends itself well to with the restoration projects going on is an experiment to try and see what we can do with these violet plugs, because of the regal populations that are in the area, to see if we can kind of bridge this corridor and create more habitat throughout that space for them to travel through. So we're in the very early stages of that, even though we started in 2019. But each year, each fall, we've had different sites we've worked with. We've worked in Denton Prairie, which is right on the edge of the city of Denton. We've worked in some degraded prairie sites / older restoration sites at Pioneers Park, and then a number of other restorations that are about 4 or 5 years old that have been completed kind of either on the I guess that'd be the north side of Denton and then going kind of to the north or the southwest of there towards Spring Creek. So it's been a very fun project to go back. It's also allowed us the opportunity to take some data on this to actually follow how these violet plugs are doing. How are they surviving, and are they in the future, are they going to recruit new individuals and become populations? So it started with some conversations with with what I was interested in, and then some conversations with Dave Wadeen at UNL. And so he got some students involved the first year in taking some data at the Pioneers Park site that we were working with. And then I've continued taking that data in the years after, which hopefully will build up to following these after about 4 or 5 years or more down the line, and see how things are doing. So what we've done is gone back to, after these sites get planted in the fall. In most cases, we've gone back then the following spring when it's easy to see these violets growing or see them in flower or see seed pods. We go back to those sites, and it's also easy to see the plant, right? So it might be after they've done a prescribed burn or hayed that area, and which is also easy for planting too. So what we've done is planted them in that fall, and then the following spring gone back and looked at what we call survivorship. And so that's looking at, did these individuals survive the winter, and are they growing that next year and thriving at that site? So I have some data on a few different sites for just that initial year. And then what we're looking at doing is following that up, a number of years after, to see what's going on. So we've seen a decent amount of success for the number of plugs we've been planting at these sites, just for them to survive that first fall into the next spring. So at the Pioneers Park site, there were 3 different planting blocks that were assessed. And I'll back up a minute too and let you know how we are planting these at the sites. So in order to follow them and kind of follow the natural pattern that these violets would be in within a prairie, is we're planting them in groupings, or kind of a cluster of 10 plants at a particular one small site. So we're planting these plugs maybe about 2 to 3 to 4 feet apart. And so just kind of making a general, say, 1.5 to 2 meter radius, and just kind of planting all 10 within that area. So what we've done is put down a flag as a center point, and taken a GPS point there, and then we know to go back and look right within those center points, to go back and look for those 10 violets. So in 2 of the different planting blocks at Pioneers Park that were fairly successful, we saw 54% survivorship in one and 67 in the other, which, considering that we planted, at this site, I think we got between 800 and 900 violets total in the ground. That seemed to be pretty good. So there was a good number of violets that were found at each of those planting blocks. The east block was a bit lower. And so it'd be interesting, I think, in the future to go back and look at some different, aspects like soil type and things like that, because there were some changes in soil type, I know, between those 2 areas. So that was that particular site. We've also looked at a couple others, what's called the Two Creeks Restoration, which is closer to Denton, and also the Honvillas Restoration on the south side of Denton. So for the Two Creeks site, the plugs were planted in the fall of 2021. And then going back that next May in 22, that particular site had about 40% survivorship of those violets at those sites. And then with the Honvillas Restoration, that was planted in 2022, went back the following year, and we actually planted 2 different violet species at that site. So again, the prairie violet there, which had 64% survivorship, which was great. And then we also planted Missouri violet in a little bit lower area, so closer to the creek that runs through that area, and kind of a mesic prairie restoration site. And there we saw 56% survivorship. And then one assessment, oops, I'm sorry, one assessment that we did just a little further out. So again, the goal with coming back a number of years after that initial planting. But this, I went back to the Hanvilla site in 2024. So after they had been planted in 22, so the same site that I had in the previous slide. But went back in 24 and found a 41% in what we're calling violet return on investment. So what's interesting to note at this point is that we actually don't know for sure at the site after another year down the road if these are all the true plugs, the actual plants we put in, or if we're actually seeing some new plants that have been recruited into that site. So that's why we've changed to kind of a return on investment and calling it that rather than survivorship. So I included, you can't really see them super well here, but some of the notes that were taken during that assessment, because you can see we saw some very small plants. At some sites, we found little seedlings right next to a violet plug that had been, or what we assumed was a violet plug that had planted. So a mature plant with a tiny little seedling next to it. So that was exciting to see. Also noting the number of plants at that time that were blooming or had the cleistogamous flowers or had seed pods. So that was really exciting to see at that point that there was the potential for these to actually be creating seeds and new violet populations. Another kind of longer term assessment that was done in the Eastern Sandhills. So these were some of the plugs that were purchased by Game Parks. And one of the sites they were taken to was the Frank Ranch in the Eastern Sandhills. So Allison Frank and then also Jen Corman with Game and Parks and Northern Prairie's Land Trust. They went out and planted these into a pivot restoration site that they had done. So you can see a lot of the planting work was done, I believe, in 2016 and 17. So the violet planting was then followed up a couple years or a few years after that. So in 2018 and 2019. So a number of different violet plugs were planted at those sites. So you can see on each side there. So the one in 18, they returned in May of 2022 and found violets at that site with a 35% return on investment. The other site where more violets were planted, they planted those in 2019, came back to assess it in 22, and found a 66% return on investment at that site. So that was really exciting. The violets, there's a picture of one right there on the left-hand side. But they reported that these violets were looking healthy. They were blooming. They also found seed pods on a number of the violets that were at this site. And again, this is a from cropland restoration that's next to native Sandhills Prairie. So that's pretty exciting to see that at a different, in a different region in Nebraska as well. So there's always next steps in conservation, always more to learn. So we have a lot more data is needed or research is needed to understand if these plug planting efforts are truly successful in establishing these violet species at restoration sites in the long term. I think what's shown with kind of our initial results is that it's looking good. But there are some sites where we might see some limited success. So, what can we learn from that? What can we learn from looking at some of maybe the site history or soil type or things like that? And how do we shift gears in the future and maybe target, different sites? So again, as I mentioned, I plan to start revisiting these sites, 4 or 5 years or more down the line to look at that return on investment, basically seeing if recruitment is possibly happening. And then also working with the land managers at those sites to record, those key management actions, because that, of course, is going to be a really important role that's played with both the development of the restoration site overall, and then how well, some of these early spring plants like violets perform at these sites. And then talking maybe with some partners too about Regal Fritillary surveys eventually. What could that look like at those sites? Kind of between that remnant prairie that's nearby, and then maybe assessing the restoration sites at the right time of year to look for adults. Or maybe how do we go out and look for larvae? That is a really tricky thing. I have only seen one Regal Fritillary larva in my life. I also suspect that they may feed later in the day or into the night. So that's something I want to check out too. So a lot of questions to answer there. We've also been working with other violet species, started growing some lance leaf violet from the eastern sandhills in Nebraska this year to trial that, and that's been working very well with similar planting methods and growing methods. We also have an interest in potentially sourcing species from other regions as well. So kind of helping other folks with their local ecotype needs. So maybe thinking about bird's foot violet in Iowa, other places in the Midwest, and potentially being a hub to help people grow these, figure out how to grow them, or maybe grow some violet plugs for other conservation groups in different places too. So an exciting thing that is happening right now is we have been building capacity and are now able to build a larger and new greenhouse. So we've been working with Ceres Greenhouse Solutions out of Boulder, Colorado. And we've luckily been able to receive some funding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then also worked ourselves to match that funding, both to build a new greenhouse and leverage more work with violets and other species that are needed at these restored sites. So to kind of build this framework for regals, for other important at-risk pollinators, and then also bolster our own restoration work as well, and capacity and equipment needs and things like that. So we are very grateful and excited for this opportunity. The picture in the upper right-hand corner shows the footings that were just poured the other week. I didn't take a minute to do it this morning, but when I came through the farmyard here, you can see concrete walls that they poured last Friday. So I was super excited about that. So we are looking forward to what the future brings, and our capacity to grow with restoration into the future. So not only, is that allowing us to, provide these resources that are important for these critical at-risk pollinator species, and other things, but we are also able to bolster our ability to reach more people and talk about restoration and get people excited about restoration and to have these hands-on experiences. So something I've been doing over the past 6 years now, we've worked with Boone Central School up in Albion and their greenhouse class to actually have a restoration unit where they visit us. They're able to see, talk about prairie ecology, take a look at what restoration work looks like in Nebraska, get experience with seed harvest, and check out our seed barn and greenhouse. Then I visit them and go over growing techniques for these native species that they're working with. And then by the spring semester, they're off and rolling, growing their own native plants for a restoration project at Olson Nature Preserve, which is near them, north of Albion. So they grow those out through the spring and then come out on site, usually at the beginning of May before their school year ends. And we do a plug planting out in a restoration site there. So that's just one example, but it's been great to share this kind of work and success stories, and hope for the future with young people, both kind of at that high school and into college level. So not only will we be able to expand what we can do with that, we also are looking forward to more internship sorts of opportunities for college and even post-college students as well. So that pretty much sums up what I was going to talk about. Again, I'm a total insect nerd, so that's the slide, but the Regal and these other at-risk pollinators really serve as kind of this poster child in conservation. But not only are we working to, conserve biodiversity and restore these areas for them, it's also for many, many, many other thousands of insect species and many other species of wildlife. So they're kind of the poster child, but when we can, do high diversity restoration, utilize plugs, really try and work to maintain and also manage for a lot of these important plant species, we're really going to bolster our ability to improve all biodiversity across Nebraska. So, and I think that is it. So I will take any questions. I apologize greatly. I think I'm a little bit over time, but
No, Sarah, thank you so much. That was amazing to hear all of that love, all this amazing, and the thank you for being so clear in your delivery and explaining in depth for this audience. I let everybody know that we were going over the hour and we only have lost 2 people. So folks are sticking around to ask questions. There are a couple in the chat. There are 2 similar ones about like species of like yard prairies versus the prairie violets, and if they're both helpful for regals.
yeah, sorry, I'm just looking in the chat here to make sure.
Okay, you got it.
So, yes, so I also love having violets in my yard too. A lot of those it depends. A lot of those might tend to be one of our native species, Viola sororia, or the I think one of the common names is downy blue violet for that one. So no, those are great to have around. If you are, they would be helpful to regals, except the only caveat to that is, of course, you'd have to be right next to a prairie. And those regals aren't going to travel very far or go into a suburban or urban setting, but you might be benefiting other fritillaries through that. So variegated fritillaries are more of a habitat generalist. You'll see them, some other places, maybe town edges and things like that where they have resources. So it is possible through that you're benefiting, other species like the variegated fritillary, and other pollinators that may come to that. Ants also are one of the main dispersers of violet seeds. So they're attracted to the little elaiosome, kind of the sugary starchy thing that's on that seed. So they will benefit from that, but carry those seeds around and disperse them. And so yeah, the ecology is important everywhere, even if it's not just for the regal. So does that help?
I understood it. It was great. Thank you so much.
I'm just looking through the other ones here too.
Okay, very good.
If anybody has a specific one too, you can speak up as well. So
somebody
okay, so one says oh, sorry, did I interrupt you, Judy?
Well, I was actually not going to plug my own question, which I just finally wrote down in the chat, but somebody had a good one about the pivot restoration, meaning they're irrigated, and my associated question was, is there native prairie in the pivot corners?
So I wish I could answer that better. I should have Allison on this call too. So I haven't been on site there, so I can't say for sure. But knowing where the site is at, there's mostly everything around that is Sandhills Prairie. So yeah, so the regals do go into the Sandhills area. Their range continues that way throughout Nebraska. So yeah, they would have regals on site through some of their area in that Sandhills. So the hope is then that they'll utilize that area that was cropped at one time with those pivots there and now has been restored back to prairie and has those violets present.
You're talking about the Frank property, Sarah, is that right?
Yeah, yep. That was your question, right? It was the Sandhills pivot property.
And I think the question, like, yes, it was cropped, it was seeded, and then irrigated with the pivot that was there from the crop. Is that the question? I don't know. I think that
That
might be
was
the question.
part of
And
the
that's what
question.
happened, correct, Sarah?
Yeah, so I believe they have been, that again, that's a question, the more detailed part for them, but I do believe because it had the irrigation already in place, they did utilize it to help the development of the restoration at least. I don't know if they've continued to use much water on it now that it's more established. But I think they did initially to help with establishment in some potentially dry years.
And then my actual question at the bottom was, do the violets only propagate by seeds, or do they have some vegetative propagation from the plugs?
Yes, that is a great question. So for so we've predominantly been working with the prairie violet. And so those basically are gonna reproduce with the seed and start new plants. There are other violet species though. So the lance leaf violet that I started working with, they do spread by rhizome. But the prairie violets are not rhizomatous spreaders. And vegetatively, I don't know of any methods that would work, like if you to try and take cuttings and reproduce vegetatively. But I'd be interested to know if there was. So
Do we have any other questions? Feel free to unmute.
I do have a question. So a few years ago, we planted native grasses and flowers in our backyard, and it's finally taking root. It's so beautiful. I saw the grasses this year, and it took a few years because it takes a while. But I was curious because we also have the violets in our like regular yard. Do you think the Regals would just like show up, or do I have to like bring them?
so are you in a town or city or
A small town. There's not
small
really an
town?
urban area. Yeah.
Okay. Are you near any native prairie or?
I don't think so anymore.
Yeah,
I
so
think it's
the
all
I
cornfield
wish I
now.
could say that they would show up, but I think being further away, probably from a native prairie site, and
Mm-hmm.
in a, town setting, that would probably not be terribly likely. But like I kind of mentioned earlier too, you probably are benefiting other species, so you may have variegated fritillaries that are around that would benefit from violets there. And of course, I think just having a native yard in general and what you're doing is awesome for so many other things too. So
Yeah, we saw a bunch of new bugs and butterflies this year. It was really beautiful to watch over the
nice.
years. Yeah.
That, that's lovely, Alexis. Thank
And
you for
also,
sharing.
hi, Alexis. I
Yes, hi, great presentation.
I have something. Um, I live outside of Blair, and we're on 3 acres, and I'm in the process of restoring 2 acres to
Mhm.
prairie. Um, I have seen a regal butterfly once. So is there a chance? I mean, I put in some prairie violets just in my garden, just because I like them, is there a chance that they could be around? I mean, it's not necessarily a crop around here. There's some developed land, and it's just kind of a mixed area. And also at Fort Atkinson, we have seen regals, not real commonly, but that's down in Fort Calhoun, and they've got a kind of they're working on a restored prairie too. I just didn't know how much of a chance you'd get them if there's kind of a
I mean, if you have seen one before, that's very encouraging. So I
yeah.
would, if you have seen one in your area and you want to add more violets to that small, even 2 to 3 acres, yeah, it's possible. I know it's a very, small site, but some of these regals are literally in, 3, 4, 5 acre prairies.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't think you would hurt anything by if you wanted to plant more and if you have seen them. So that's pretty cool.
Are are we able to obtain plugs from you, or do we have to be with a organization, or how's that work to get
Uh,
plugs?
You are, yep. So the only thing is making sure I have priority for any, making sure we have enough plugs for any, conservation oriented like the prairie corridor sites that we're
Yeah.
going to. But yes, I have sold plugs for, the homeowner garden, the educational pollinator garden, things like that. So you can certainly reach out, and if I have enough, we can certainly.
Now I'll contact you personally because there's a Turkey Creek Preserve. I'll ask them if they're interested in doing
Yes. Okay. So,
some of those too.
yeah, I believe I'll have to ask him for sure what part, but I think Mike just did some of the planting work over there at
Yeah.
Turkey Creek. So just in the last couple of years, I think it was. So
Yeah. They got a lot of area to work with. So I'm going to
yeah, oh, that's
talk to
exciting.
them.
Yeah, and I would because is there a little piece of native prairie there too?
Yeah, I believe so. There's might be remnant. I'm not 100%, but there might be a little bit. And it's more of a shorter grass area too, which is unusual.
Yeah, well, I would certainly be interested if they have the interest in doing that, and if anybody sees Regals at that site, that'd be a wonderful
Yeah, on
target.
butterfly counts we have Adam.
We have.
So
I saw one at that count we went up there for. Before we saw any monarchs, there was the first thing we saw was a regal.
yeah.
Awesome. That's wow. You guys are fantastic. You're you're like a knowledge hub for like doing the butterfly surveys. Are you guys part of the Master Naturalist butterfly count?
And also the
Not yet.
Regal, both of these folks do the Regal and Monarch counts as well.
Awesome.
I was not really, but
Awesome. That's yeah, I love that. So so yes, feel free to reach out. Yeah, that's awesome.
I will be sending a follow-up email with Sarah's contact information and links to Prairie Plains Resource Institute in their social media and an article on Regals and Prairie Violets. Sarah, thank you so much for your time and your vast knowledge. What a lovely, wonderful presentation. I am so grateful to have you on today.
Well, thank you
And
very much. And yeah, thanks for inviting me. And I feel like I was just scrolling. I'd hate to miss any questions. So if you please reach out if you have other questions. So
yes, that email will go out and you can email Sarah. Does that sound good? Awesome. I'm gonna run through real quick while those of you are here on a couple of things. Oh, Sarah, can I have you stop sharing? I didn't
oh
realize that
yes,
was
I am sorry.
I
Yep.
didn't realize that was happening either. Thank you all for coming and sticking around. Sarah, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. That was so good.
Yes, thank you everybody. Thanks for hanging out today.
Let's see. Okay, so upcoming events, please fill out your evaluations for this. An evaluation will be going out too, and I will send that on to Sarah so she can get feedback. And also we're coming up on the end of the year, and I am working to pull together all of the where everybody at with their pin recognition and how many years of service. So if you can please get in your hours. I will be sending an email with that information to the Track It Forward and your password and username and all of that shortly out onto the listserv, because we will be having your member recognition event coming up. And that is where your years of service pin are doled out. I did not get that completely accurate at last year's event, so that's what I'm going to be doing this over the next few in the next month up and leading up into our Field and Feast event. Save the date for February 14th or February 28th. It's going to be one of those 2 days. I'm working to get the Field and Feast committee pulled together to get solid on a date and a location for that event. Let's see. We will have our final Master Naturalist Mondays webinar on December 1st. The 2026 training dates and locations for Master Naturalist certification will be posted after January 1st. And then also a partner organization event is coming up. The Nebraska Environmental Education Conference, NACE, our state's environmental education organization, hosts a very well put together, fabulous conference every year. This year's theme is Rising Together, Building Belonging Through Art, Ecology, and Stories of Place. That conference is February 6th and 7th in Kearney. I will send along the link to the NACE conference page so you can find out more details there. And then I think that's it. So thank you all for sticking around. If you have any questions, feel free always to reach out. Sarah's information is going to be going out to you. That follow-up emails goes out to everyone that registers. So I'm glad to have you all here. Great to see your faces again so soon. And make sure you're out seeking beauty and awe and joy out there in the natural world, the more than human world. It's really important. It's really important for us to do that.
All right. Thanks. Great day.
Thanks, Tobin.
Where's my camera?